Airbrushes are amazingly useful tools which can be used to get incredible results very quickly. Unfortunately, they can be quite daunting to get started with, so hopefully that's what this video is going to help you with. An airbrush is a small tool that we use to spray paint onto our surfaces, and when the airbrush is connected to the compressor, it breaks the paint up into tiny droplets. This is called atomization. Unfortunately, running paint through an airbrush can cause it to clog up. On the upside, there are a few ways that we can manage this. For me, the way that I do this is I use a combination of water and flow improver. The water thins the paint down so it stops the airbrush from clogging up, while the flow improver operates like a drying retardant and helps keep the tip from drying out. When loading your airbrush up, it's better to mix the paint out of the airbrush. This stops the thick, unthinned paint from falling into the tunnel of the airbrush and causing blockages that are awkward to fix. Now, I can't give you a perfect paint consistency for airbrushing because every paint is different. But me personally, as a general rule, I aim for 1 part water, 1 part flow improver, and then 1 part paint. As a rough guide, I'm generally looking for my paint to be semi-transparent when I test it on my palette, which is exactly what you can see on screen now. If your paint is too thin, it's going to be far too wet and it's going to build up quickly and spider. And if it's too thick, your airbrush is going to block and you're going to get speckling on your model, which is incredibly frustrating. It's better to build up multiple thin coats with your airbrush and avoid blockages rather than trying to do 1 thick coat. Remember, this is a finesse tool. Although airbrushing speeds up your painting, it's still something that shouldn't be rushed. Pulling the trigger down will release the air, while pulling the trigger back will control the amount of paint that is released. And in my opinion, this is the most important skill to master when using an airbrush. Your control of the trigger will ultimately determine the quality of your work. And as a general rule, you don't want to be pulling that trigger all the way back because it's just going to blast an extreme amount of paint all over your model. A good tip when airbrushing is whenever you're starting out, especially, and you're maybe less experienced, is always start and end your brushstroke off of the model. And the reason for this is if you start your brushstroke off of the model, it gives you time to get the strength and the size of your spray correct. And it also means that any potential mistakes that happen at the beginning are going to happen off the model and not on it. There's a few reasons for this, and it relates to some of the difficulties that come with airbrushing. Firstly, the start and the end of the brushstroke can easily end up with a stronger deposit of paint, so it's better to start and end your brushstroke away from the model so it doesn't ruin your work. Secondly, and most importantly, as you're airbrushing, the tip of the airbrush can get a build-up of paint, causing dry tip. This can cause sudden splatters of paint, especially when you're starting your brushstroke. So it's better that this happens off of the model. Lastly, if your airbrush has got a blockage or a bent needle, your paint can end up speckling, or the cone of paint that you're spraying may not be perfect. And again, better that this happens off the model so you can correct it before you ruin your work. A big struggle people seem to have is knowing when to stop airbrushing. In my experience, a good indication of when to stop airbrushing is when your paint looks wet or shiny. Otherwise, you'll end up creating puddles and spider webs on your model. As soon as your paint starts looking wet or shiny, stop airbrushing, let it dry, and then continue afterwards. And lastly, cleaning your airbrush, you don't have to strip it down every time. First of all, empty the cup of all of its paint, run some water through the airbrush until the spray from the airbrush is coming out as clear water. Once this happens, it means all of the loose paint has now left the airbrush. But it's not going to be clean. You're still going to have lots of paint stuck in the tunnel and around the needle. At this point, then get your airbrush cleaner. The airbrush cleaner that I'm using is Medea Airbrush Cleaner. Whatever your preference is fine. Pour some airbrush cleaner into the cup of the airbrush, work the needle backwards and forwards, and spray the airbrush cleaner out at the end. You can also block the needle and spray the airbrush cleaner. This will blow it back up through the cup and it will help dislodge any stubborn bits of paint. And with that, thank you very much for watching. I really hope it's been helpful. If you have enjoyed it, please hit the like button. It means a massive, massive amount to me. If you do want to support the channel further, feel free to check out the members area, which has got a ton of extra video content to help you guys improve your painting. Thank you as always.